The surveyor had his hand flat on my boat's keel, 4 feet above the gravel, when he looked up at the three of us and asked which one was the owner. My wife's brother, who was standing there holding an envelope with a cashier's check in it, said, "That would be me." It was 7:15 on the third Thursday in October. My boat hung in a pair of yellow nylon slings, 42 feet of her out of the water for the first time since March, still dripping on the crushed shell, and there were 4 grown men standing underneath her, who all believed they knew exactly who she was. 3 of them were wrong, and one of them had known he was wrong for about 11 months. My name is Wade Gillikin. I am 76 years old. I live in Wallace Bight, North Carolina, down at the bottom of Corvin County where the road quits and the water starts. And I have made my living off that water since the fall I turned 18. My father built that boat in 1971 out of juniper and longleaf pine in a shed behind our house, without a single sheet of plans, because that is how the men on this shore did it. He shaped a half model out of a block of white pine first, with a draw knife and his 2 thumbs, and when it looked right to him, he set it on the bench and started cutting wood. Now, before I go any further, do a thing for me, because I sit with a cup of coffee in the dark and read these, and it beats the news. Tell me what people from away get wrong about where you live. Every place has one. Down here, they think we all eat fish every night, and they think a boat is a hobby, and they think if you are on the water, you must be relaxed. Whatever it is where you are, the tired old thing outsiders always say, put it in the comments and set the record straight. I would rather hear that than almost anything. That is the whole ask. Now, let me back up, because this actually starts 3 years ago. My wife Junie passed 3 years ago this coming February. She was 69. It was her heart, and it was quick, which everybody kept telling me was a mercy, and I have never been able to make that word fit. We were married 44 years. She kept the books for the fish house, she ran the scale, and she could tell from the sound of my truck door whether I had a good day or a bad one. Junie had a younger brother named Denton. Everybody has called him Denny since the Ford administration. He is 61 now. He came to work on my boat in 2004, when the tile plant laid off 90 men in one morning, and he was one of them, and he stayed on that deck for 22 years. 22 years of picking crabs out of pots at 4 in the morning in January with the spray freezing on the washboard. Hold on to that while I tell you the rest, because I am not going to pretend the man never worked. He worked hard beside me for longer than some marriages last, and there were 2 separate mornings out past the inlet when I would not have gotten home without him. I promised Junie I would look after him, not in a dramatic way. She said it once, at the kitchen table, the winter their mother died, the way you ask somebody to pick up bread. Look after Denny. He does not ask. I said I would. Our boat is named the Nola Wade, after my mother. 42 feet. Wooden hull. Flared bow. Round stern. The whole down east shape that people from off come here and take pictures of. She has been federally documented since the day my father finished her, and that is a thing a lot of folks do not know about, so let me say it plain, because it matters later. A car has a title from the state. A little boat has a registration from the state, same as a car. But a working boat over a certain size gets documented by the Coast Guard instead, at a federal office, and that document is the whole of her legal life. Her name, her home port, her official number carved into a beam down inside her, where you would have to crawl to read it. My father did that with a chisel in 1971. I have crawled down and put my hand on it more times than I can count. I bought her from him in 1988, when his hands quit. We did it at the kitchen table with a lawyer in Beaufort who charged us $90. And that, right there, is the entire recorded history of that vessel, built by him, sold to me. 2 events. 55 years. Remember that. 2 events. After Junie died, I had a bad stretch, and there is no polite way to put it. I ate badly. I slept worse. And in June of that year, I came off the fish house steps wrong and tore something in my shoulder, and the doctor in Newbern put me in a sling for 11 weeks and told me that if I hauled a pot before Labor Day, he would personally come to my house and take my truck keys. So, Denny ran the boat. Of course he did. There was nobody else. He ran her the whole back half of that season, and he did fine, and I sat on my porch and got heavier and quieter. And in the middle of all that, 2 pieces of paper got changed. Neither one of them felt like anything at the time. The first was the state side. Down here, if you fish commercially, you carry a license and your boat carries a commercial fishing vessel registration, and that registration lists a master. The master is whoever is running the boat. If the master changes, you notify the state within a few days. So when my shoulder went, we notified them, and the master on my vessel registration became Denton Kittrell. That was true. He was mastering her every single day. The second was the federal side. The Coast Guard document gets renewed every year, and the notice comes in the mail, and I was in a sling and not opening mail. Denny said he would take care of it, and he did. And when the new certificate came back, there was a line on it that had not been there before. Managing owner, Denton R. Kittrell. I saw it. I am telling you that plainly, because the easy thing here would be to claim I was tricked, and I was not tricked, not that day. I saw those two words, and I read them, and I thought, well, that is so the mail comes to him while I am laid up, which is exactly what it means. I did not ask anybody. I did not call the lawyer in Beaufort, whose son had the practice by then. I did not read the back of the certificate. I did not think about it again for 2.5 years, because it does not look like anything. It looks like a chore, printed in small type, on a card with an eagle on the top. The following March, on the second Sunday, I did what I have done every year since I was 39. I took my father's half model down off the 2 brass hooks over the kitchen door and oiled it, tongue oil, and a piece of old undershirt, with the grain bow to stern, then across, then set it on newspaper for a day, 20 minutes, and I have never once done it without talking out loud, first to my father and, these last 3 years, to Junie. On the flat back of that half model, in carpenter's pencil, my father wrote the numbers, length, breadth, depth. He wrote them in 1970, before there was a boat, when there was only a block of pine and a man who could already see her. Those same 3 numbers are printed on her federal document to this day. Not close. The same. Then I hung her back up and went and made a bologna sandwich, and I did not think another thing about any of it for 4 months, which was 3 months and 2 weeks too long. Here is how a thing like this actually announces itself. Not with a bang. With a series of small wrong notes that each have a perfectly good explanation, until one day you line all the explanations up and notice they were built by the same man. The first wrong note came in July, and it was a fuel bill. I buy diesel from Sowell Oil, out of Smyrna, have for 31 years. Their bills come on the 2nd of the month on a green carbon form, because Reese Sowell is 79 and does not believe in the internet. That July the bill did not come, and when I called, a young woman told me they had changed my mailing address in April at my request. To where? I said. A post office box, in sea level, she said. I do not have a box in sea level. I do not have a box anywhere. I have a mailbox on a cedar post at the end of my lane, and it has said Gillikin on it since Eisenhower. I said, all right, put it back. She did, and she apologized, and I hung up and stood there with my hands still on the phone thinking about how Denny's wife's people are from sea level. Right there is where a smarter man, or maybe just a younger one, would have driven straight to that post office. I did not, and the honest reason is that I did not want the answer. I was 75 years old, my wife was dead, my shoulder ached when the weather turned, and Denny Kittrell was the only person alive who called me at 8 o'clock on Sunday nights for no reason. The second wrong note was a truck. In August, Denny showed up at the fish house in a gray 3/4-ton pickup, 4 years old, clean as a church. I said that is a lot of truck. He said his wife's cousin was in a bind and let it go cheap. Denny's wife is named Lurleen, and she has been sick, badly sick, for 2 years. And there is not a soul on this shore who does not know it. So when Denny says the word wife, everybody's face does a certain thing and the conversation moves on. Mine did too. The third wrong note I should not have been able to walk past, and I walked past it anyway. Late August, hot, dead, low water, and I was at the counter at the fish house when Buster Piggott, who runs the ice, came around and said, Wade, that boy of yours ever hear back about the lease? What lease? I said. The bottom lease, Buster said. Denny was in here asking Amelia how a shellfish lease gets moved to somebody else's name, whether it goes with the boat. I hold a shellfish bottom lease, 2.5 acres of Corvin Sound off the west end of Hatch Point, held since 1994, with oysters growing on it that Junie put down by hand out of a skiff. The state issues those leases. They are not deeds. They are not something you hand a man with a set of keys, I said. Does not go with the boat, Buster. That is what Amelia told him, Buster said. He asked her twice. He asked her twice. That turned out to be the truest sentence anybody said to me all summer. A man who asks a question once is curious. A man who asks the same clerk the same question twice is not looking for the answer. He is looking for a different one. And I still did not go home and start pulling records. Here is what my thinking was. And if you have ever had this same thought and felt foolish about it afterward, you should not. If I go digging and there is nothing there, and Denny finds out I went digging, that is a wound on 22 years that will not close. His wife is dying by inches. He is the only one of Junie's people left. And what am I actually accusing him of? That he asked a question about a lease. So I did what I have always done when the water does not look right. I did not gaff a fish I had not seen the whole of. I waited, and I watched, and I let the tide bring it closer. Except I did not really watch. That is the part I have to own. I told myself I was watching, and what I was actually doing was hoping. Then came the last week of September, and a man in a rental car. I came down to the town landing at 6:10 on a Thursday morning to load bait, and there was a silver sedan with an Elizabeth City sticker on the bumper parked where nobody parks, and a young fellow standing at the edge of the dock in brand new white boots taking pictures of my boat with his telephone. Not pictures of the harbor, not pictures of the sunrise, pictures of my boat. Bow, stern, both sides, the mast, the hauler, the pot rack. He walked down the whole length of the dock to get the port side clean. I said, "Morning." He jumped about a foot. Then he grinned. Big and easy, the way a young man grins when he is happy about something and has been holding it in. He said, "Sir, I hope you don't think I'm being strange. I'm just excited." Excited about what? About her. And he pointed at the Nola Wade with his whole hand, the way you point at a woman across a room when you have already decided. Behind him, up on the shell lot by the ice house, my wife's brother was leaning against the fender of that clean gray truck with a cup of coffee in his hand. And when the young fellow turned around, Denny raised the cup and gave him a little salute. Then Denny looked over and saw me standing there, and he did not move, and he did not wave, and he did not come down. I have known that man since he was a skinny boy who could not swim. I have watched his face take a hook through the meat of the palm and not change. And in that 1 second, across 60 yards of gravel and shell, I watched his face do something I had never seen it do in 50 years. It went blank on purpose. That is when I finally understood I was not going to get to keep hoping. The young man's name was Isaac Merrill, 27 years old, from up around Elizabeth City, and everything about him was correct in the way that only a boy raised by careful people is correct. He put out his hand before I put out mine. He said "sir" at the end of sentences instead of the beginning, which is how you can tell a person means it. I did not tell him who I was, not right off. I asked him if he wanted a cup of coffee out of the pot at the ice house, and he said "yes, sir." And we sat on the 2 folding chairs by the door, where the men sit when the wind is out of the northeast, and I asked him to tell me about the boat. He told me for 11 minutes without stopping. He had crewed 6 seasons out of Wanchese. He had a fiancée named Delia who taught 3rd grade. He had sold his own truck and a bass boat that had been his grandfather's, cashed out a retirement account with a penalty on it, and his mother had put in $19,000 she got when her brother passed. He had $55,000 down on the Nola Wade, against a price of $140,000, and he was closing on the 3rd Thursday in October, right after the survey. He said the word survey the way a bridegroom says the word rehearsal. I asked him what all was in the deal, and he said, "The whole package, sir. Boat, gear, the license, and the bottom." I set my coffee down on the concrete beside the chair leg so my hand would have something to do besides shake. "The license," I said. "Yes, sir. The commercial license, so I can go straight to work, and the shellfish lease off Hatch Point. That's really why the number's what it is, Mr. Kittrell said the boat by herself is maybe 90. But with the license and the bottom, you're buying a business, Mr. Kittrell said. I asked him, real easy, whether he had any of that in writing. He got out his telephone and showed me a photograph of a receipt. Not a contract. A receipt. On a duplicate pad. The kind you buy at the drugstore. The kind I have written 1,000 of for a man buying a bushel of oysters. It said $55,000. Deposit. Nola Wade. And license and lease. And it was signed Denton R. Kittrell, managing owner. Managing owner. I looked at that word on that boy's telephone screen for what must have been a long time, because he asked me if I was feeling all right. I said, "Son, do you know who I am?" He said, "No, sir." I said, "My name is Wade Gillikin, and that boat belonged to my father." and it has belonged to me since 1988, and I have not sold her to anybody. I have thought about that moment probably 400 times since. Because here is what I expected. I expected him to argue. I expected him to say, I was confused, or that Mr. Kittrell had told him about me, or to get his back up and start defending the $55,000 that was already gone out of his life. He did not do any of that. He went white, all at once, from the collar up. And then came the sentence that showed me how far down this went. He said, he told me you'd say that. The tide runs 2.5 knots through Corvin Inlet on a spring ebb, and there is a spot on the south side where it goes over a bar and stands straight up. I have felt calmer in that than I felt in that plastic chair. I said, what else did he tell you? Isaac Merrill looked at his hands. He was about to have to repeat something ugly to the person it was ugly about. And he did it. And I have never held it against him. He said you were the owner on paper. He said you built her with your daddy and it's your name on everything and that's how it should be. But he said your memory's been going since your wife passed. He said some days you don't know what year it is. He said you'd already agreed to sell twice and forgot both times. And that when it came time to sign, you might look right at me and say you never heard of me. And I wasn't to take it personal. There it is. That is the piece that turns a money problem into something else. I have heard 100 stories on this shore about a family member helping himself to a checkbook. That is ordinary theft, and it is bad enough. But when a man starts telling the world you are not in your right mind, he has stopped stealing from you and started building a reason why nobody should listen when you speak. That is not a crime against a bank account. That is a crime against a person. And to those of you who are 70 or 80 and living alone and can feel the world starting to talk over the top of your head, hear me. If somebody close to you starts explaining you to other people when you are not in the room, you are allowed to notice. That is not paranoia. That is hearing. I asked him one more thing. Whether anybody besides Denny had ever told him a single fact about that boat. He thought and said the surveyor had been hired. The lender had approved his loan, and a girl at an insurance office in Beaufort had bound coverage effective the closing date. Son, I said, every one of those people is working off a piece of paper somebody handed them. He said, then what do I do? I said, come with me, and we will go find out what the paper says. Not what a man says, it says. Because there was one document in this whole business that had never once been in Denton Kittrell's hands, and I was about to go get it for $4. We took my truck. Isaac wanted to take his car, and I said no, because I did not want him alone with a telephone for the next 4 hours. A young man who is frightened will do something loud, and loud was the one thing I could not afford. First stop was the state license office up the road at the county seat. It sits in a low brick building with a marine fisheries seal on the glass. And behind the counter that day was a woman named Amelia Fulcher, who I have known since she was in the youth choir at Mount Pleasant. I said, Amelia, I need 2 things. I need a printout showing every license and vessel registration issued in my name and every one that lists my boat. And I need you to tell me whether anybody has ever filed an application to transfer any of it. She did not ask me why. She has worked that counter 19 years. She knows what it means when a 76-year-old man comes in on a Thursday with a stranger and asks for his own records. It took her about 20 minutes. Here is what she came back with, and I am going to lay it out plainly, because this is the part that saved us, and because somebody listening to me right now is going to need it inside of 5 years. My commercial license was current, in my name, without a break since 1969. The vessel registration on the Nola Wade was current, in my name, with the master listed as Denton R. Kittrell since the summer of my shoulder. The Shellfish Bottom lease off Hatch Point was current, in my name, renewed in April, paid by my own check. And there was no transfer application on file. Not a completed one. Not a pending one. Not a withdrawn one. I asked her what it would take. Amelia turned her monitor partway around so we could both see, and she said this. A license in this state does not move because 2 men shake hands. It moves when both people, the one giving it up and the one taking it, fill out the same application, sign it, and get it notarized. The one receiving it has to swear to his violation history. Both of them swear the whole thing is true. Then the division has to approve it. Until that happens, nothing has happened. Then she looked at Isaac and said, and a bottom lease is separate again. That is, a lease from the state to a named person for a described piece of bottom. It does not travel with a hull or a truck, or a set of pots, or a handshake. It moves when the division says it moves. Isaac Merrill sat down on the bench by the door and put his face in his hands. Amelia said, "And Mr. Gillikin, somebody did come in about all this." In August, he asked twice, and then he asked me a third time on the telephone in September, whether a lease could be assigned by the person who is running the boat. "What did you tell him?" She said, "I told him no, 3 times. And the third time, I told him he ought to bring you in with him." I asked her one more thing before we left. "Amelia, in all those conversations, did that man ever once tell you I was not competent to sign my own name?" She said, "No, sir. He told me you were tied up and that he handled the paperwork." That mattered. I did not know how much yet, but a man who lies to a young buyer and tells the truth to a state clerk is a man who knows precisely which lies are dangerous. Second stop was the Register of Deeds, 1 street over, in the courthouse annex, where the air conditioning has never worked right. Down here, land records go to the Register of Deeds, and estates and guardianship go in front of the clerk of Superior Court, because this state does not have a separate probate court the way some do. The clerk of Superior Court is the judge of probate. I have lived here 76 years, and I could have told you where every shoal in that sound is, and I could not have told you who probates a will in my own county. I pulled the deed on my house and on the fish house lot. Both clean, both in my name. Nothing recorded against either one. 11 minutes and $2.50, and I stood at that counter feeling something loosen behind my breastbone. Third stop was the boatyard office at Hatch Point, where Pike Guthrie keeps a fax machine older than Isaac Merrill. Because here is the thing about a federally documented vessel. The certificate you get in the mail, the one with the eagle and your boat's name and her official number, is a card. It tells you she is documented. It does not really tell you who owns her, and it does not show mortgages, and it does not show liens, and it does not show what kind of ownership it is. Those things live somewhere else. They live on a document called an abstract of title, kept by the Coast Guard at a records office up in West Virginia, and any human being on Earth can order one on any documented vessel for a few dollars. You do not have to prove you own her. You do not need a lawyer. A buyer can order one. A seller can order one. A man can order one on his own boat any Tuesday he feels like it, and every one of you who owns a documented vessel should do exactly that once a year, the same week you do your taxes, and read every line. I had never done it, not one time in 38 years. I filled out the request with Pike's pen. Vessel name, official number, my name, my address, $4, and Pike ran it through and said it would come back in a day or two. Isaac said, "What do you think it's going to say?" And I gave him my honest answer. I said, "I expect it will show that boat has had exactly 2 things happen to her in 55 years, and that neither one of them was this summer." I was wrong about that. It said 3. Stay with me here, and yet subscribe before I open that envelope, because what comes next is 2 pages of the dullest paper the federal government produces, and the third line on it is the entire reason a boat my father shaped out of a block of pine is still tied where she belongs this evening. Pike called me Saturday morning. He said, "Wade, it come in, and then you want to come get it or you want me to read it to you?" And something in how he asked told me he had already read it. The abstract of title on the Nola Wade is 2 pages long. 55 years of a boat's life, and it fits on 2 pages, and there are 3 entries on it. The first is dated November of 1971. First documentation. Owner, my father, Marvin Lee Gillikin, Wallace Bight, North Carolina. The second is dated March of 1988. Bill of sale. Grantor, Marvin Lee Gillikin. Grantee, Wade Ames Gillikin. That is the kitchen table and the $90 lawyer. And the third is dated the 11th of September of this year. Notice of claim, of lien. Claimant, a marine finance company in Norfolk, Virginia. Amount, $95,000. Filed against the vessel, Nola Wade. Official number. And there was her number. The one my father cut into that beam with a chisel. That was 6 weeks before I read it. I sat in Pike Guthrie's office in a metal chair with the fan going and read those 2 pages 4 times. Then I read the third entry out loud, because sometimes you have to hear a thing in your own voice before it becomes real, and Pike stood in the doorway and did not say a word. It took a lawyer and 2 more weeks to nail every piece of it down, but I will give it to you straight now so you are not confused later. In February, Denny Kittrell borrowed $95,000 from a finance company that lends against commercial boats. He applied as the managing owner. He sent them the certificate of documentation, which has exactly one name in the owner block, mine, and one name in the managing owner block, his. He sent the vessel registration, showing him as master. He sent photographs of the boat, which he had every right to take, because he was standing on her deck every day of his life. And a young loan officer in Norfolk who had never been to Corvin County looked at a card with an eagle on it and a man's name under the word owner, never mind the word in front of it, and she funded the loan. They did not order an abstract of title before they funded. They ordered one after, in September, when the first payment did not come, and then they filed their notice of claim so that whoever tried to sell that hull would run into them, which, in the end, is the only reason any of this got caught in time. A stranger in Virginia, protecting her own company's money, put a piece of paper into a federal file, and that piece of paper was sitting there waiting when I finally thought to look. She was not a hero. She was somebody doing a job with a form, and the form outlived everybody's intentions. So, February, $95,000 against my hull. June, $38,000 from a young man named Farrell Styron, 24 years old, out of sea level, for what Denny called the license and the bottom, to be transferred at the end of the season. 22,000 of that came from Farrell's mother, a widow named Lorette who cleans rooms at a motel in Atlantic Beach, out of a life insurance policy on Farrell's father. August, 55,000 from Isaac Merrill, against a boat already carrying a lien Isaac knew nothing about. $188,000 out of the pockets of two young men, one widow, and a finance company, all of it moving on the strength of one word, on a card that meant who gets the mail. And here is what he owed, because I found that out later too, and it is the part I still cannot set down. Lurleen Kittrell's treatment had run past what the insurance would carry in the second year. A place in Chapel Hill and a place in Durham, a lot of driving, a lot of nights in a motel, a lot of things that are not covered. Denny had gone through their savings, then a second mortgage, then a credit union loan, then two of those signature loans that are not really loans so much as a way of being eaten slowly. By last winter, he was $161,000 underwater and paying 5 different places out of a mate's share. He never asked me for a dollar, not one time in 3 years. I sat there in Pike's office and did the arithmetic on how many Sunday nights he called me at 8 o'clock to talk about nothing, while his wife slept in the next room and his mail sat unopened on the counter. He had not set out to rob me. He had set out to fix something he could not fix, and every door he was entitled to walk through was locked, so he went through mine, and told himself he would put it back before I ever knew. That does not make it smaller. If anything, it makes it worse, because a man who steals out of greed can be argued with. A man who steals out of desperation has already had the argument with himself and lost. I drove home the long way and pulled off on the causeway where you can see the whole west side of the Sound and the corner of my lease with the stakes still up. And I decided 2 things sitting in that truck. The first was that I was not going to shout at anybody, ever, about this. Not once. Because the second I raised my voice, I would become exactly the confused old man he had described, and every person in that transaction would go home and say, "Well, you saw him." The second was that the survey on the 3rd Thursday in October was going to happen exactly on schedule. I was not going to cancel it. I was going to be standing under my own boat when it did. The lawyer I ended up with is named Ada Prentice. Her office is 1 flight up above a hardware store at the county seat, directly over the aisle where they keep galvanized nails. 53, reading glasses hanging on a little chain, estates and land, and the occasional boat. She took one look at that 2-page abstract and said something I am not going to repeat. Then she said, "All right, rules. Here were the rules, and I am giving them to you because they were the difference between a mess and an ending." I would sign nothing. Not a release, not a confirmation, not a letter, not a birthday card if it had a signature line on it. I would threaten no one, not the finance company, not the buyers, and above all, not Denny. And I would promise nothing to anybody who had put money in, not $1 and not one word of comfort that sounded like an assurance, because the fastest way to become responsible for another man's fraud is to start soothing his victims. She would write to Norfolk that same afternoon, disputing the lien and stating plainly that the vessel had one recorded owner and that no mortgage bearing my signature existed or ever had. She would give the whole file to the state. Because taking money for a license transfer that never happened and never could happen is not a family disagreement. It is obtaining property by false pretense. It is a felony here, and the amount put it in a range where nobody was going to treat it as a squabble. And she would not, she said, tell me to cancel that survey. I asked her why not. She took her glasses off and let them fall on the chain, and she said, because right now there are 4 different people holding 4 different versions of this story, and every one of them thinks the other 3 are confused. If you cancel, they scatter, and they will spend a year telling each other about you. If you let it go forward, they will all be standing in the same 15 feet of gravel at the same time, looking at the same piece of paper, and there will not be a version left to tell. Then she said, do you want to talk to him first? I said yes. She said, I would advise against it. I did it anyway. Here is how it went, because this is the part these stories always skip, and it is the part that nearly broke me. I went to the fish house on a Monday afternoon, and Denny was on the culling table with his back to me, and I said, Denny, I need to ask you about a boat loan. He turned around, and he did not look guilty. Nobody ever warns you about that part. He looked tired and a little annoyed, the way a man looks when he has been asked the same dumb question all week. He said, what loan? I said, $95,000. February, out of Norfolk, against my hull. And he said, without one beat of hesitation, that was the reprop and the electronics and the haul out. Wade, we talked about that. We stood right here and talked about it. We did not talk about it. You told me to handle it. You said, handle it, Wade. My shoulders shot, and I can't be running to Norfolk. Those were your words. They were not my words. That's why you put my name on the document in the first place. You said, Denny, put your name on there so you don't have to bother me with every little thing. It was not my idea, and it was not his either. It was a renewal form and a sling, and a widower who was not reading his mail. Then he said, the one that got in under my ribs. He put down the culling stick and came around the end of the table and said it gently, which is how these are always said. Wade, you forgot Junie's birthday in February. I did forget it. I forgot, because I had stood in the kitchen thinking about her all morning, and by the time I looked at a calendar, it was the 17th. That is not a failing brain. That is grief. But I stood on that concrete floor with the ice machine roaring, and for about 1 hour afterward I honestly wondered whether I had told that man to handle it. Hear that, whoever you are. I had the abstract of title in my truck. I had a state clerk who had told him no 3 times. I had a young man's receipt with his signature on it, and a man I trusted said 4 sentences in a soft voice, and for 1 hour I doubted myself. That is the whole mechanism. It is not sophisticated. It only requires that the person doing it be somebody you love. What brought me back was the half model. I went home and stood in my kitchen in my coat and looked up over the door at that piece of white pine and at the 3 numbers on the flat of her back, and I thought, he wrote those before there was a boat, on the side that faces the wall, where nobody would ever see them. A record is not a thing you make when you need it. It is a thing you keep when you do not. And I had one, 2 pages, $4, in a manila envelope on the seat of my truck, and it did not care what year I thought it was. I called Ada Prentice the next morning and told her I was done talking to him. Then, Tuesday evening, my telephone rang, and it was a woman I had never spoken to in my life, Lorette Styron, from Sea Level. She had gotten my number off Amelia at the license counter, who had told her exactly one sentence. You need to call Wade Gillikin. She did not cry. She was past that. She asked one question, carefully, like she was stepping on ice. Mr. Gillikin, is there a lease? So I told her straight out. There is a lease. It is mine. 2.5 acres off Hatch Point. And nobody had ever filed one piece of paper to move it to her son. She was quiet a long while. Then she said, he was going to be a fisherman. Ma'am, I said, he still can be. It will take longer, and it will cost him nothing but time, and I will tell him how. But he has to hear it from me on a Thursday morning and not before. And I am going to ask you to trust me about the reason. She said, all right. Then she said, is it your brother-in-law? I said, yes, ma'am. And she said, then, I am sorry for you too. I did not sleep much that week. The 3rd Thursday in October came in clear and cold with a hard little breeze out of the northwest, which is the best weather this shore has. Pike Guthrie hauled the Nola Wade at 10 minutes to 7, and by 1/4 past she was hanging in the slings with the wash water still running off her and the shell under her turning dark. There were 6 of us in that yard. Pike, in his rubber boots, running the lift. Gordon Vi, the marine surveyor, 62 years old, out of Oriental, hired by Isaac's lender, with a ball cap and a plastic mallet and a lump of blue chalk in his shirt pocket. Isaac Merrill, in a jacket he had clearly bought for the occasion, with a bank envelope inside it. Denton Kittrell, in a folding chair he had brought from his own truck, a red accordion folder across his knees. Me, back by the travel lift tire where I have stood for 40 years watching my boat come out of the water. And Farrell Styron, 24 years old, who I had asked to come and to say nothing, standing at the gate with his hands in his pockets. Denny saw me and nodded like it was any morning. Gordon Vie did his work first, thoroughly, and that alone took an hour and 10 minutes. He tapped the whole bottom with that mallet, working the plank seams, listening. He got up in the shaft log and crawled the bilge with a light. He came out from under her with his knees soaked and said she was the soundest wooden hull he had put his hands on in 3 years, and that whoever had been taking care of her had been doing it right. And Denny Kittrell smiled at that, and I did too. And that was the last thing the two of us ever agreed on. Then Gordon Vi climbed down off the ladder and sat on the tailgate of his truck and opened the tablet, and he said the sentence, the routine one, the one he says at every pre-purchase survey he has ever done, in the same flat voice a doctor uses to say take a deep breath. All right. Paperwork. She's federally documented. So before anybody signs anything, I run the abstract of title. Standard on any documented hull. Who's the owner of record? And Denny said from the folding chair, I'm the managing owner. Gordon Vi did not look up from the screen. He just said it the way you would tell somebody the tide. He said, managing owner is who gets the mail. It got very quiet in that yard. The only sound was water still running off the boat onto the shell. Tick, tick, tick. Gordon turned the tablet around so Isaac could see it, and he read the 3 entries off it out loud. 1971. First documentation. Marvin Lee Gillikin. 1988. Bill of sale to Wade Ames Gillikin. And the 11th of September of this year, notice of claim of lien. $95,000. Norfolk, Virginia. He said, there's no bill of sale after 88. There's no mortgage of record. And there is an outstanding claim on this hull that nobody disclosed to my client. Isaac Merrill said, out loud, to nobody. 95,000. Denny stood up out of the folding chair, and the red folder slid off his knees onto the ground and came open, and he did not pick it up. He said the loan was a boat improvement loan between him and the lender, nothing to do with the sale. He said the transfer was at the state and had been for weeks, and these things take time. He said he had power of attorney, which he does not, and never did. And that is the first sentence that morning. I am certain he knew was a lie, as it left his mouth. Then he turned and looked at me and said, Wade, tell them. I walked out from behind the tire. I did not raise my voice, and what I said took about 40 seconds. I said, my name is Wade Ames Gillikin. I was born in that house across the water in 1950. My father built this boat in a shed behind it in 1971, and I bought her from him in 1988, and I have never sold her, offered her, listed her, or agreed to sell her to any person living. I have never signed a note with any lender in Norfolk, Virginia, or anywhere else, and no such signature exists. Then I handed Isaac Merrill 3 things. The abstract, which he already had on the screen but which I wanted in his hand on paper. A printout from the license counter showing my license, my vessel registration, and my bottom lease all current in my name, with a line at the bottom that said no transfer applications on file. And a copy of the receipt he had shown me on his telephone, which Ada Prentice had already sent to the state, with the words managing owner circled once in pencil. Isaac looked at all 3. Then he looked at Denny. And I will give that boy credit until the day I die, because he did not yell either. He said, you told me he wouldn't remember. And Denny said nothing at all. Gordon Vi closed his tablet and said, I'm going to stop the survey. Mr. Merrill, do not release any funds. And out at the gate, Farrell Styron, who I had asked to keep his mouth shut, and who was 24 years old and had just watched $38,000 of his dead father's insurance money evaporate in front of him, said one word. He said, Mama. He had her on the telephone. She had been on it the whole time. Denny Kittrell walked to his truck and sat in it for 11 minutes with his hands on the wheel and did not start it. Nobody went over there. Then he got out and came back and picked the red folder up off the shell and put the loose pages back in it in order, one at a time, which is a thing I still see when I close my eyes. He said, to Gordon Vi, not to me. My wife's got about 4 months. Gordon Vi said, I'm sorry to hear it. It doesn't change what's on the abstract. And Denny said, no, I know it don't. That evening, Isaac Merrill sat at my kitchen table under the half model and ate a plate of my sorry cooking, and Lorette and Farrell Styron came at 7 and sat across from him, and I told all three of them what I am going to tell you now. It is the closest thing to advice you will get out of an old man who is not a lawyer, and never will be. Nobody can sell you a license in this state on a receipt pad. It moves when both people sign the state's own form, get it notarized, swear to their record, and the division approves it. If a man tells you the transfer is in process, you call the state yourself that day and ask them for your own name. Nobody can sell you a bottom lease with a boat. The bottom belongs to the state, and it is leased to a named human being. And on any vessel big enough to be documented, before your money leaves your hand, order the abstract of title yourself, not the seller's copy, not the broker's copy. Yours, dated inside of a week. It costs about what a sandwich costs. Then I said the part I most wanted them to carry out of my kitchen. I said, the reason this worked for 11 months is not that anybody here is a fool. It is that every one of you looked at a card, read the word owner, and skipped the word in front of it. There is a whole language of words on American forms that sound like ownership. Managing owner, authorized signer, responsible party, custodian, master, account holder, person in charge. Every one of them means somebody handed you a chore. Not one of them means somebody handed you the thing. So if your name is on something, go find out what your name means on it. And if somebody in your family offers to take the paperwork off your hands because you have got enough to worry about, let them, and then ask for a copy of every single thing they file. A decent person hands it over without blinking. Ask the other kind and watch what their face does. And go sit down with a lawyer for 1 hour, one time, while you are still the one doing the talking. Not because anything is wrong, because it is a great deal cheaper to be told everything is fine than it is to find out it is not. Now let me finish it out, and I am not going to make it prettier than it was. The state charged Denton Kittrell with obtaining property by false pretense and with account for the loan application. He pled. His lawyer put every medical bill Lurleen ever generated in front of the judge in a stack you could not get your hand around, and the judge read the whole thing and said the bills explained it and did not excuse it, and that the widow in Sea Level had not been consulted about being enrolled in his emergency. He got 16 months suspended, 5 years of supervised probation, and restitution he will be paying at $340 a month for the rest of his working life. His commercial license is gone for 3 years, and he is not permitted to be the master on any vessel in this state until 2029. Norfolk released the lien on my hull inside of 6 weeks, once Ada put the abstract and my sworn statement in front of them. There was nothing else they could do. They had lent money against a boat on the strength of a card, and there was no signature of mine anywhere on earth to argue about. Isaac got his $55,000 back out of what was left in Denny's account and the sale of that clean gray truck. Lorette Styron got 22,000 of her 38 the same way, and is owed the balance, and may or may not see it. I did not ask the district attorney for the maximum. I did not ask for the minimum either. I asked for 2 things in writing. I asked that the record state plainly that I had never sold, offered, or agreed to sell that vessel, and that I was competent and had been throughout, because that is the piece that would have followed me around this county for the rest of my life. And I asked that the 2 young people and the widow be made whole before the state took a dime. I have had people tell me since that I let him off. Maybe. But I have buried a wife, and I know what it costs to be the last one holding a family together. And the years I have remaining are not going to be spent standing on a man's neck in front of his dying wife, so strangers can call me strong. Lurleen Kittrell died the following March, on a Tuesday, at home. I went. I sat in the back. Denny and I did not speak, and we did not need to. This is where I am now, and then I will let you go. Isaac Merrill bought the Nola Wade in May. For real, this time. $120,000, which is under what Denny was asking, and about what she is worth. And we did it the way it is supposed to be done. A written bill of sale on the Coast Guard's own form, notarized at the credit union with the notary looking at both our faces. Filed. 11 days later, a fresh abstract came back with a fourth entry on it, and I made that boy read all 4 lines out loud standing on the dock before I handed him the keys, the same way Gordon Vi had read 3 of them in a boatyard the October before. He works too hard, which is the correct amount for a man his age. He calls me about once a week with a question about weather or about where the bottom changes off the point, and about once a month with a question about paper, and those are the ones I like. The license is still mine. When I am done, it goes back to the state, and that is exactly right, because it was never a thing. It was a permission. The lease off Hatch Point is still mine, and Farrell Styron works it with me. He came to me in November, on his own, without his mother, and asked whether there was any way in the world for a man with no money to get into this. I told him there is, and that it is called going to work for somebody who knows how, for years, and that I had a lease that needed a young back on it. He is 25 now, out there 3 days a week, with his own little skiff, and in about 6 years he will be somebody worth hiring. His mother sends me a pound cake at Christmas. I have told her twice to stop, and she is not going to. And Denny lives in the same house in sea level. He works at Pike Guthrie's yard now, sanding bottoms and setting stands, because a man who is not allowed to be a master can still be a man who works. Pike hired him with his eyes open and told me before he did it, which I appreciated and did not need. He pays his 340 on the first of every month, without fail. Ada Prentice says she has never seen a restitution order paid that reliably and that it makes her uneasy. I know exactly what she means, and I have decided not to look at it too hard. We speak now. Not much. He came to the dock in June, the day after Isaac took her out for the first time on his own, and stood there and watched her go around the point, and said, "She sounds good." I said, "She does." He said, "I'm sorry, Wade." I said, "I know it." That is the whole conversation. It took maybe 9 seconds. I do not expect a better one, and I have quit needing there to be. The half model is still over my kitchen door. I oiled her the second Sunday in March like I have done for 37 years. And this year, for the first time, I turned her over and looked at the back for a good while before I hung her up. 3 numbers, in carpenter's pencil, in my father's hand, written in 1970 on the side that faces the wall. Length, breadth, depth. He put them where nobody would ever see them, because he was not writing them for anybody. He was not writing them to prove something. He was not writing them because a lawyer told him to, or because he had a bad feeling about somebody. He wrote them down because that was what you did when you knew a thing and wanted it to still be known after you stopped. That is what a record is. It is not something you go make on the day you need it. By then it is too late, and it is only your word against a nicer story. A record is what you keep on the ordinary Tuesdays when nothing is wrong, in the drawer, on the back of the model, on 2 pages in a federal file in West Virginia that costs $4 and does not care who you are or what year you think it is. My father shaped that hull with his thumbs before he ever cut a plank. He could see her whole, and he wrote the numbers down anyway. So do that. Whatever it is you have got, and whoever it is you love, and however certain you are that it will never come to this, go find out what your name means on it. Low water at Hatch Point is 5:45 tomorrow morning. I will be out there on the lease with a young man who is not mine, working a bottom that is not his, and neither one of us has to guess about a single thing.